We had no radios or TV and things like that we did. But let me tell you, from that moment on, when we were told that this was war, that's it. My life, I thought, changed. It was not fun anymore. And I think this is when I got to be a little bit, I think I grew up overnight. And because there was fear from then on, it was fear. And so, you know, this is really something, you know, for a young kid, just changing like that. But all of this, never experienced anyway, was not fun anymore.
Jimmy Lee was 11 years old on December 7th, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. He was outside feeding his family's pigs when he heard the planes overhead. He watched from less than a mile away as they dropped their bombs on ships in Pearl Harbor. Jimmy Lee, next on Long Story Short.
Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox is Hawaii's first weekly television program produced and broadcast in high definition.
Aloha mai kako, I'm Leslie Wilcox. James Hoi Sao Lee, better known as Jimmy, was raised on a farm in an area known as Kalawao. Just upland of Pearl Harbor's East Loch, Kalawao was famous in ancient times for its freshwater springs and fish ponds. Today the name is gone and the land is covered with buildings and roadways. But in 1930, when Jimmy was born, the stream still flowed and supported the family farms in the area.
You know, my parents were born here, but their parents were born in China. And of course, my father at a younger age went back to China and lived there for a short while. But anyway, they came back here and they were rice farmers long time ago. And then they gave up rice and got a farm, pigs, some cattle, chickens, ducks and things. It was really only for, not for commercial type of thing, it was just for home use. Well, anyway, that's what we had there, and in a little place called Kalawao.
Which is where?
It's located between Ia and Pearl City right now. And it's, I must say, it's no longer on the map anymore.
Well, what's there now?
It's, well, right now it's all full of warehouses, apartment buildings, and stores, and commercial area. The whole area's been filled. Even the fish pond that was there before, it's all filled up. It's all warehouses there now.
So this is on the Pearl Harbor side of Kamehameha Highway in Aiea side?
That's correct, yes, that's right. Oh. And you could never recognize the place before because it was so rural. Our neighbors were not just next door. I mean, they were maybe about a half mile away. We were all friends, but you know, that's what it is, just a local, rural area.
So your farm was for subsistence?
Yes, for subsistence, yes. Mm-hmm.
And where did you go to school?
I was going to school at Aiea. I schooled about maybe about a mile or two away, up in the hillside.
You had many siblings?
Oh, yes. Well, you see, my father was married to this woman, and of course she had 4 kids. And then when one of the older brothers was born, and she died. So some way, you know, they met my mother. And they got married, and of course she cared for the 4 kids like her own, and then of course she had 6. I'm number 6 in that family.
Birth order is important, right? What does that mean your responsibilities were?
Well, me and my brothers, you know, we had to take care more or less the animals, the rough stuff. You know, and of course the sisters were there to help my mother, you know, whatever. But we had to take care of the hard stuff, like the cows, milking the cows and feeding the pigs and picking up garbage and walking in the pond, catching ducks and chickens and things like that. My parents were very strict. You had to stay home and do your work, feed the pigs, and you know, and that took up a lot of our time during the day. Yes, we had other neighbors, but none of them, maybe, they may have had some pigs or some chickens, but not like we did. And of course, they mind their own business. We were never enemies, but we were all friends, but you know, they had their own little thing. But again, you know, they were not right next door. But we did get together once in a while, more than just to say hello.
And what was your personality like as a boy?
You know, my older sister told me that I was a rascal little kid, full of mischief.
And you know nothing about this, right?
And I knew nothing. And, you know, because we just played. I mean, whenever we had spare time, we would do that. And, you know, we had our pigs, and, you know, our pigs were our pets. You know, we would jump in and play with the pigs and things like that because, you know, that was what it was. But we were a bunch of rascals and did a lot of things. When I was 8 years old, I broke my leg. And I was in the hospital, in Trans Hospital for 6 months. Because I would just run through the fields, the cane fields, running all over the place, playing with the dog or playing with the cows, you know, just running all over the place.
Lots of energy.
Lots of energy.
So your idea of mischief is just really having tons of energy and running around.
That's right. We were. And again, typical country boy. And
did you see a lot of activity at Pearl Harbor? You know, you must watch the ships. Oh, no, you're a mile away, so you couldn't see it.
Oh, no.
You could see it?
Oh, in the inner side of the harbor, there were so many ships anchored in there. And of course, this was closer to my home. As I mentioned, about a mile away, but this was maybe a quarter or half a mile away, all anchored there from what I could remember. Yeah. There were a lot of ships.
On December 7th, 1941, Jimmy Lee started the day the same way he began every other morning of his young life, doing chores. It was the last time his life would be so uncomplicated.
Your life changed one day when you were just 11.
Oh, yes. Well, I can say it really changed. Well, not for that very moment, because it was so exciting when everything was happening that it was fun. I never saw anything like that in my life. And although I was feeding the pigs that morning, when I saw all of these things happening, wow, what is it?
What did you see?
Well, feeding the pigs, and all of a sudden, over treetop level, here comes these planes. I could hear the roar of the planes with gunfire, cannon fire, looking up, and I saw the bottom of the plane, you know, the big red circle, and so low that you could see the pilot. But as I looked, wow, there were planes all over the place. And curious as I was, I ran down to the railroad track, and boy, I tell you, I never saw so much.
You ran to the action rather than away from it.
Yes, down the railroad track and sat on the railroad track just like sitting on the front row of a theater to watch a show.
And didn't think of calling anybody? Or?
Didn't call. My parents didn't know where in the world I was. I could see all the way in Waiawa over the airport, which is, I could say, at least 10 miles. Planes all over the place. And, you know, for a youngster, like never seeing anything like that, all the sounds, the explosions, the planes coming in, the gunfire, the smoke, the fire. It was really a sight. And was I scared? No. I don't remember ever being scared.
Did any of the bombs come close to you?
The bomb didn't come close at all. And in close to our home, there were many ships in the harbor that day. But none of them were being even harmed, but way out there when I saw near the island, that's where all the fire and smoke was. But, you know, what's happening to this? Everything was there, not in front of me. And so, you know, there was not a shot or anything like that fired my way. I didn't feel in danger at all. So it was just seeing all of those things, the torpedo planes being blown out of the sky, the explosions from the, I didn't know that was the Arizona at that time, but you know, the explosion, something you'll never forget. And yet at the same time, up in the sky, the planes are flying, all the gunfire, none of the planes are shot down, but none of those shrapnels or shell ever fell on us either. And that was really a show. And then the other most exciting ones I mentioned was in Nevada. I didn't know that was in Nevada, but that was a ship coming in, burning and smoking, and seeing the dive bombers coming in, dropping the bombs, blowing up on the ship. And the ship don't sink. And then here comes the planes coming by, strafing, and the ship still don't sink. It just keeps moving, and it's burning and smoking, and it finally disappears. You know what's happened. And then, you know, finally, you know, time went by so fast. But it was finally announced that, hey, we're at the wall. Through loudspeakers or something, we're at war, we're being bombed by the Japanese, and the Japanese troops had landed. And let me tell you, when that happened, that's when fear came in. Oh, it was not fun anymore. We were so scared, didn't know what to do. My parents finally found me, and we got on the jalopy, took off into the hills, up in the valley.
Just to
Just to get away, yes.
Okay.
And to hide out in the caves over there. And, you know, they had banana fields, and we could, you know, we were in the caves, we could see the planes up there, we could hear the bomb, we could hear the firing, but we could not see the attack. And then it was over after a while, a very short while it was over. There wasn't any more planes in the sky anymore. So we went home to get more supplies and everything, but when there, no more planes, the attack was over. But at the same time, all the fire, the flame, the boats. And I think one of the most, I guess, sights that was very sickening to me was seeing the boats going around and around with, you know, fireboats, you know, trying to put out the flames. But later we learned that they were picking up dead bodies and survivors.
Oh, I see.
You know, seeing something like that. And you know, something like that you'll always remember. And of course, with all of that, the explosions that going by. You know, when I saw one of the ships on the other side of the island, the first one to get hit, wow, what is this? But again, we always thought it was a game, but it looked so real. And I can tell you honestly, I watched these torpedo planes come in, dropping the torpedoes, and of course, not knowing what it was the Oklahoma that was being hit. But what was most exciting was when the planes came in, it was hit by gunfire. Seeing the flames coming out, the smoke, and it blows up in the sky, I was cheering. I remember jumping up and, wow, they shot down another plane. Not knowing what it was, but it was impressive, you know, for a young kid. But let me tell you, from that moment on, when we were told that this was war, that's it. My life, I thought, changed. It was not fun anymore.
On the afternoon of December 7th, 1941, the territorial government of Hawaii surrendered its authority to the U.S. military. The new military governor issued laws that severely restricted the freedom of residents of Hawaii, instituting blackouts, curfews, and food and gas rationing. Soldiers enforced the restrictions.
When we came back down, there were soldiers all over the place. And this is when we later understood we came under martial law, where the military was under control. And that's where they told us, you folks will obey. You will follow our rules. And so this is what it is. So we were scared of them. You know, the young soldiers, things like that. And I, for one, was scared of the military. But at the same time, we were very happy we felt safe with them. You know, I can tell you that military really shaped me up because, you know, I was arrested so many times for doing things wrong, which to me, I mean, there's nothing wrong at all because I've been doing this all the time, like going into the water, catching crabs, catching fish and digging clams, because that's our food. But when martial law came, you could not step into the water.
Pearl Harbor.
That's right, Pearl Harbor. And for myself, I know I've been in there, I got arrested many, many times for violating, for trespassing. But because I was a little youngster, they let me go. But don't do it again. Yes, okay. But as soon as they turned their back, we were in there. We had to eat. That's it. But martial law was very strict, and we lived in fear. You know, it was about 3 years that we had that. But I'm going to tell you, one of the most, I think the one that scared the daylights out of me, and I still remember this. You know, my job was to milk the cows in the morning. hey, you know, we had to eat. So we had to milk the cows, and we had curfews. And cows don't believe in curfews. You know, I remember taking the cow out of the bushes that one morning before curfew time. And you know, you're walking through the bushes and you hear noise. And you know, a soldier met me with a bayonet sticking at my throat. Boy, I tell you, a tall soldier, and I think I was maybe only 2 or 3 feet high, with a cow, with a rope, and a soldier to meet you with a rifle, with a bayonet sticking at his throat. That young soldier told me he was so scared. He didn't know whether I was friend or foe. And I looked different, you know, and he was so scared. And at the same time, he said, you know, with all the talk about the Japanese troops that landed, he thought I was one of them.
Mm-hmm. But so he was sort of apologizing to you for
well,
holding
yes, in a way. And I said, but you know, they're small, but they're not that small.
You said that as a kid?
Yeah, that's right. I tell you, I remember saying that, and you know, maybe not exactly, but basically that's what it is. But I was so scared. But you know, he got to be our friends. And you know, because you know, their camp was right next to our property. But later on, when we got to know him, and you know, as the war progressed, they kind of looked the other way, you know. But that was very interesting. But that's something I will never forget. You know, as an 11-year-old kid with a bayonet sticking in his throat. But we really, you know, with the soldiers over there, we felt safe. And then at the same time, you know, they kind of let us into the camp. They knew who we were, and they could trust us. They knew we were not enemies or anything. So they kind of bend backwards a little bit for us. And that's what, you know, I really, for myself, I really liked the soldiers after a while. You know, and they were real nice to us. And they were that's what it was amounted to.
They just happened to be camping right next to you, too.
Yes, right next. You see, at one time, they used to have what we call barrage balloons, you know, up in the sky with cables dangling on it to deter Japanese planes from diving, you know, from dive bombing. And the whole perimeter of Pearl Harbor used to have that, but that's what it amounts to. You know, and so this was the little detachments they had. And you know, I can say one of the things that they had was that we used to go out there and dig clams and crabs, and we taught them how to eat. And we had rationing. And they used to have a lot of chickens and steaks, you know, and boy, we would kind of envy them. But at the same time, because of our pigs, they let us pick up the garbage from them. And you know, many times in the garbage we had steak and chickens wrapped up pretty well.
Oh.
And boy, I tell you, we ate them. We ate a lot of steak and chicken. They couldn't give it to us outright. I think they hid in the garbage. But we ate a lot of chicken, a lot of steak. But we were friends. We were friends.
Were they friends with everybody in the area?
They were in the area. And again, because of one of the things I do want to mention, though, you know, our neighbors were a little far apart. But when we had martial law, everybody came together to help each other. I didn't realize you could even do that, but you know, people, we had to dig bomb shelters. They would out there help us dig bomb shelters. They made sure that everybody was being cared for. You know, we shared things. I tell you, the community came together and really helped out. And the soldiers were there, and again, they were there as protectors, but then at the same time, you know, they were friends, you know, and so that's one of the big things one of the changes that really got me is how the community got together. You know, Hawaiians, the Puerto Ricans one side, the Hawaiians, the Filipinos on this side. They were just great.
Jimmy Lee's boundless energy continued to get him into trouble with the law. His parents came up with a solution.
My parents always said that I needed to have discipline. And because I was getting arrested and getting into problems all the time, You know, they sent me to Iolani school.
Oh, that was your prison?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Because it was an all-boys school, you know.
And but it was far away, and in those days,
away, yes.
transportation was probably an issue, right?
It was transportation, but you see, my sister married an alumni from Iolani, and through some maybe pull or recommendation, I was able to go to Iolani. Of course.
Did you live in town?
Yes, she lived in town, in the Chinatown area. You see,
and your parents paid the freight for you to go to Iolani?
Well, I think because my brother-in-law, you know, was in the photo, he was a photographer, and his father was a minister. I think they footed everything because my father could not do that.
Did they knock that rascal spirit right out of you?
It sure did. It sure did, because again, I say martial law was still there. Mm-hmm. And this is where the teachers, you know, during the years at Iolani, it was all boys, and they were strict. You know, and the families that we had the kids were not like me. They were not like me. They were a little, you know, I think a little more refined, I think, where I had to behave.
And they probably never taking care of pigs or anything.
That's right, they never did.
I wonder if your parents, after having seen you arrested by the military, and you would go back and do the same thing again, even though it wasn't, you know, a terrible crime. They probably were afraid that you'd really run afoul of the military.
Oh yes, and you see, when they first sent me out there, my aunt lived next to a wild prison, and they're always saying, "We're keeping you close to the prison because you're going to end up in there."
And yet, when I think about it, you know, your crimes were not terribly serious.
That's right, they were not.
Even though martial law ended 3 years later, Jimmy Lee stayed at Iolani, where he graduated and went on to the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He was drafted into the Army and eventually made the civilian branch of the military his career. Throughout much of Jimmy's life, there was a mystery that he kept trying to solve. On the day of the attack, his best boyhood friend, Toshi Yamamoto, had disappeared.
When I came back that morning, December 7th, you know, this was around midday already. And I ran out by the plum tree and yelling out, "Toshi, Toshi, where are you?" There was no answer. I ran under the house where we played hide and seek. "Toshi, where are you?" None. I ran up to the house where I used to sleep. The house was empty. From that day on, December 7th again, never saw him. During all those years when I was in school, even when I was in the military, I used to write little notes, you know, "Where are you?" Hoping that someday I would, you know, he would come back and maybe an old man like me would come up and say, "Hey, I'm Toshi," but that never did happen. And when I spoke about him over the radio on December 7th, 2012, that's when his son called and said, "You're talking about my dad." Oh, I tell you, that really struck me. I could not even say a word anymore. I was speechless. When I finally met the son, that's when the son told me a little bit more about his father, and that they were at gunpoint, forced to leave. They lost everything, but they were never imprisoned, never threatened. You know, and he was allowed to work and things like that. But you know, one of the things about this for myself, you know, when it started like that, it was not only, you know, lost the feeling, you know, of witnessing an attack like that, but I lost my friend, my best friend. And I asked him, "Where was your father?" "Buried in Kaneohe." So on December 14th, I went out searching for the grave, and I finally did, sure enough. But I tell you, one of the things I had to do was just that I had to stand over the grave, and that was him. And I tell you, it was raining. I don't know whether it was raining kind of my eyes or not, but as far as I'm concerned, I had tears in my eyes, where I finally had to say, "Toshi, after 71 years, I finally found you." you know, and so long and goodbye.
At the time of our conversation, just before the 75th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack, Jimmy Lee was getting ready to mark his 86th birthday. Mahalo to Jimmy, a Kaneohe resident, for sharing stories that we hope will live on in commemoration of many lives, lives that were lost and lives that continued but were changed forever. And mahalo to you for joining us. For PBS Hawaii and Long Story Short, I'm Leslie Wilcox. Aloha ahuiho.
For audio and written transcripts of all episodes of Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox, visit pbshawaii.org. To download free podcasts of Long Story Short with Leslie Wilcox, go to the Apple iTunes Store or visit pbshawaii.org.
His son told me that his dad worked hard. And one of the most remarkable things about this is that the son, he's with the community college in Eva right now, and he's never gone back to the old house before. So on December 20th, I took him and all the grandkids and sat them down and told them the story, and the kids, ages 9 to 14, all wanted to hear the story about what it is. And sitting on the seawall, I was able to point out where the grandpa and I played, in the trap where we used to catch fish. That's where we used to go out in the mud flats, you know, digging clams and things. And with that, I tell you, I was very, very happy to be doing this.